The news is a very familiar part of our lives all around us. But it's worth taking a moment to remind ourselves what it's for and what it does. So fundamentally, it's there to let us know about what's going on in the world that's supposedly most relevant and important to us. But what fascinates me about the media is that it doesn't just mirror society, it also moves society. Where the news places its focus affects our thoughts, our feelings, our conversations, our beliefs, and in turn, our choices and actions which ripple out into the world. In fact, the philosopher Alain de Botton recently wrote that the news has come to replace religion as our central source of guidance and our touchstone of authority. So what's it doing with this responsibility? What modes of thought is it perpetuating? And how does it make us feel about who we are, about the world, and about what's possible? Well, let me ask you, who here feels, by way of applause, that the news is too negative or depressing? So your response doesn't surprise me, because people tell me every day that they're watching or reading or listening to the news less, precisely because it's too negative. So this is a shame for journalism, and it's also a shame for society, because it can lead people to become disengaged. Now, I want to be clear, I think it's essential to report crime and war and famine, and to expose exploitation and inequality and corruption, and to hold power to account. But the overwhelming negativity of much of the media as a whole can turn people away. So, by way of balance, at Positive News, we publish stories about positive developments that are happening around the world. We take a solution-focused perspective on the problems facing society. So what does good news look like? Well, take a look at this. So this is Twiggy, the water skiing squirrel, and he's a bit of a legend. There's been a lot of news about him, and there's a lot of stuff like this online which you might be familiar with. So just to be clear, he's probably a really nice little guy, but this isn't news, and it's not what I'm here to talk about. So instead, Positive News publishes quality journalism about things like the fact that statistically, the world is actually becoming more peaceful. So obviously, we still have a long way to go, and there's tragic conflicts taking place right now in the world. But the number of wars taking place worldwide reduced from 50 in 1990 to 30 in 2010. And violent crime is falling in this country, while the murder rate in New York is at its lowest since records began. Meanwhile, in Rwanda, they've now elected a parliament with 64% of seats held by women. And in Tunisia, Islamic and secular groups have cooperated in an unprecedented way to create the most progressive constitution in the Arab world that enshrines a comprehensive list of human rights for its citizens. And in Iraq, they've restored a massive area of marshlands that was decimated during the war, and it's become Iraq's first ever national park. Meanwhile, in Uruguay, the president there has chosen to donate most of his salary to charity. He lives on a small, modest farm and drives the same VW Beetle that he always has. He's the kind of guy who's likely to turn up at the UN in flip-flops, but whether that's a good thing or not, I think is personal preference. And at the grassroots level as well, there's amazing things happening. So we see things such as the Transition Towns movement, the fact there's 15 million people volunteering in this country, and social enterprises, businesses working profitably, but primarily for the benefit of society and the environment, are increasingly succeeding and multiplying. And there's many instances of individuals who are creating positive change in their own lives and in their communities. Take, for example, Simeon Moore, a former convicted gang member who turned his life around and ended up creating peace talks between two deadly rival gangs in Birmingham. This led to a 40% drop in the local crime rate, and he's now set up a social enterprise educating young people in the area about why they should avoid the gangster lifestyle. When I join the dots between all these stories that we publish and look at the bigger picture, I see something incredible happening. I see a movement towards new ways of living, new ways of structuring our communities and institutions, and it's all underpinned by a strengthening of positive, universal human values, such as kindness, compassion, cooperation, and service to the whole. Of course, this isn't to deny the many and complex problems of the world, and I firmly believe in acknowledging the problems and looking face on at the pain and suffering that's in the world so that it can be healed. But as well as looking at what we want to move away from, we also need to look at what we want to move towards. So we need stories that inspire. On my commute into London in the mornings, I often look around at everyone reading a newspaper or reading the news on their phones, and I try to catch the expressions on their faces and see how people are responding to this information diet that many of us consume every day. And I think to myself, imagine if all these people were reading more positive news stories, and if positive stories were given more prominence. What would the world look like that day if all the people reading the news with their morning coffee, or all the people listening to the news on the radio when they take the kids to school, or all the students reading news tweets on their phones when they should be listening to their university lecturer? If we were all reading more positive stories, how differently would we feel? What conversations might we have differently? And how differently would we relate to strangers on the street, or to our friends, or to our colleagues at work? Well, fortunately, we're now seeing this change begin to take place. Following in the footsteps of positive news, there's newspapers and websites publishing positive stories that are cropping up all around the world. They're now on every continent. And we're also seeing the mainstream press begin to take note. There's an emerging field of what's being called constructive journalism, or solutions journalism. And this is about bringing positive elements into conventional reporting, remaining dedicated to accuracy, truth, balance where necessary, and criticism, but reporting in a more engaging, empowering way. The most exciting development in this field is the work being pioneered by a journalist called Catherine Guildenstead. She writes a regular column for Positive News, and she's a classically trained investigative reporter, but she's also studied in positive psychology. And she's now bringing the understandings of positive psychology to journalism. So positive psychology is all about studying what enables human beings to thrive. So she's looking at things like the language we use, the emotional tone of articles, and what kind of questions we ask as journalists. Are we fostering victims, or are we looking for experiences of growth? Her research at the University of Pennsylvania found that negative news creates learned helplessness and passivity in people. Whereas if the same core facts are addressed with more of a positive approach, with positive elements in the article, even if it's primarily a piece of bad news, then it creates a more empowering emotional response where people feel that something constructive can be done with that information. And just last week, research from the University of Texas found that when people read online news, they're more likely to share that news about a problem if information is also included about the potential solutions or about how the problem is being tackled. So a more positive form of journalism will not only benefit our well-being, it will engage us in society, and it will help catalyse the potential solutions to the problems that we face. And it's good for journalism as well. It strengthens journalism's commitment to truth by giving a fuller picture of reality, and it commits journalism to its fundamental ethics, such as minimising harm. Our readers tell us that the stories that we publish have a profound impact on them, on how they feel, on how they look at the world, and how they go about their lives. And I know that when I read all the stories that we publish, I feel an electrifying sense of possibility, and I feel an awareness of the vast human potential. And indeed, laboratory studies by the positive emotions specialist Barbara Fredrickson have shown that when positive emotions course through us, our awareness expands from a habitual focus on ourselves to a more generous focus on the collective. And she says that negative emotions have proved useful for human beings in survival, fight or flight situations. But it's positive emotions that have driven civilization forward because they foster creativity and innovation. And the good news for the media, when we talk about publishing positive stories, is also that it sells. There's an organisation in France called Reporters d'Espoir, Reporters of Hope, which creates supplements of positive stories and publishes these within French national newspapers. And they find that when they publish these supplements, sales of the papers increase. But fundamental to the significance of the media's impact is the knowledge from positive psychology, to quote the positive psychologist Shawn Achor, that it's not so much the case that reality shapes who we are, but it's the lens through which your brain views the world that shapes your reality. So we have a choice. We have a choice as to which lens we take to look at the world, and a choice as to what kind of stories we create and bring our attention to. So my vision is for a news media that increasingly waters the seeds of transformation by reporting in a way that, rather than triggering fear, instead triggers the human spirit. We can bring our attention to those stories that make us come alive. Because if we change the story, we change the world.